Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. It's Clarissa. I'm today joined with my good friend Anne-Marie.
Good morning.
And we've got an exciting special guest today who's really excited to be here, Linda. She's just had half an hour of observing just what it's like to work with Clarissa, particularly half an hour prior to a webinar. So thank you so much for coming with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Very exciting. So I think this is the launch of our new sort of webinar series in the sense that we've got all these nice guests lined up moving forward. We thought maybe you'd be getting a bit sick of hearing from Anne-Marie and I. We should bring in some friends.
We're not yet, but you guys might be.
So Linda kindly said to me that listening to these webinars, she feels like she's getting to have a coffee with Anne-Marie and I, but in a more targeted sense. And I thought that was such a lovely description of what it's like to listen to us from the other end, because I know we always wonder what it is like to listen to us from the other end when we're just having a chat. I can see that some of you are in the room already. So as you're there, if you get a chance, hi, Nikki. Thank you for letting us know you're there, way up north. Let us know you're there. Let us know that you can hear us. Just a reminder with the technical side of this stuff, what we've learned is if you get locked out as such or your computer stops you listening throughout the course of the webinar, it's probably because you're running too many programs at once and you'll need to shut a few things down and then just try and log back in. I've had feedback that sometimes people lose sound or sometimes they lose the images or sometimes they lose everything. So if that's you, just try and log out of some other stuff and then log back in. Anyways, today we're talking about the role of a financial planner in collaborative practice, which I think is going to be a great discussion and is something that more and more of us are really starting to use, but it's still probably not, well, I guess, Linda, you're not used as much as I think you'd like to be and as I'd like to see you be. So that's really what we're going to really focus our discussion on today. I don't think we need to tell people about us anymore, do we? You know where to find us. We're in Brisbane.
The only observation I wanted to make about these seminars, and I think we might have touched on it the webinars last time, was that we now have attendees from all over the country, which is both fantastic and also really encouraging that the issues that we're talking about in this forum are not Brisbane-centric, they're not Queensland-centric, they really are a way of thinking that can be effectively applied wherever you practice, and that we might also then pick up tips that aren't regularly used and adopted where we most frequently practice. So please could I encourage you to share those as we talk about these kinds of topics. And although Brisbane is where Linda is based, again, the concepts are applicable everywhere.
And good morning, Bob. Thanks for saying hi. Very kind of you. Linda, I'm going to get you to tell us about you.
Great, thank you. I'm a senior wealth advisor, as you can see on your screen. I've chosen to specialise in the area of assisting family law clients, and I've been doing that for nearly 4 years now. That was at the beginning when I decided to do the collaborative training. Since then, I work in most areas assisting clients in various aspects of their financial planning, but it is quite a passion to work in this area. I really enjoy seeing clients come out the other side and move on with their lives. And I guess my involvement with the client extends over many, many years, whereas you might only have connection with them for a fairly short and usually quite difficult period of their life. So I get to see them move on and do all the things that, that are great. Yes,
the nice stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Really lovely.
Perfect. So, goals for today, I think largely they've been summarised, but Anne-Marie, did you want to add anything there in terms of what we're really wanting to focus on today?
I think there's two things that I hope you will take out of today. One is the specific advantages of embracing a person with Linda's skill set, but also what you will see from her is that the work of a financial planner, as opposed to an accountant who offers something quite different, is the ultimate in interests investigation. the way that Linda approaches her job really is what we all aspire to do in the context of collaborative negotiations. And I hope that you'll see that in a really natural way that allows us to think about, well, how might I do that? Not necessarily with the same issues as Linda, but the whole approach is really, from my perspective, profound and enormously helpful.
And so really what I wanted to recap on before we get stuck into the role that Linda and people like Linda would play in this process is coming back to the notion of a team. And I think for me, that's what really sets collaborative practice aside from any other legal process for separating families, is the idea that a group of professionals can actually be working together to solve a common problem. Anne-Marie and I were last week at a discussion forum around the future of law and innovation and all of these things, and Anne-Marie made such a poignant comment around what value comes from situations in a collaborative process where she and I are able to sit and together solve a problem, bring our separate skill sets to the same issue, and the solutions are so much better than they could be if it was just one of us working with just one client. Then you add to that potentially other disciplines. You add in financial planning, accounting, psychology, and an array of other disciplines, and the value and the solutions that we can create are so interesting and exciting. And I think that's the bit for me that really sets collaborative aside from mediation, particularly from anything else. So thinking about that concept of a team, I know when I teach collaborative practice, we teach a team model, but many of us start with what I'll call a basic team, a two-lawyer team. And I think making that step to then bring other players into your collaborative team is a bit sometimes scary. It's a bit daunting. How do you talk to your client about adding more professionals, particularly if cost is an issue, which I think cost, to be frank, is an issue for everybody. So the notion of there are more people at the table. These are some of the challenges that we've all faced, and they're the issues that we're going to really try and flesh out today, so that hopefully you've got a better understanding of when you might want to use a financial planner, how to bring them into the process, and how to talk to your client about the value that they're really going to bring, not only to your client, but to the whole team and the whole process. So just on that, and Linda, if you could maybe talk to us literally through your role as a financial planner, whether it be in collaborative or just in life, I think.
Yeah, sure.
Tell me what you do.
Yeah, sure. I think if I just take probably the financial, the family law space, in my experience, what I've found to be quite a significant hindrance to people moving through their matter is anxiety and fear. And I think that a lot of that comes from the fear of the unknown. Am I going to be okay financially seems to be quite a large part of that. When we can have a meeting with the client, and really, I think when you talked about the questioning techniques, I think financial planners are very well skilled in this area. It's what we're trained to do. By law, we have to make sure that our advice meets the best interests of the client, and the only way we can do that is by exploring their goals and objectives. So, in other words, their interests. So I find that in an initial meeting with a client, by exploring those interests, using the questioning techniques to flesh out what their lifestyle goals are, then being able to say, put a number on that, say to the client, well, look, given everything that you've told me, I think that you'll probably need X dollars per year to fund that kind of lifestyle. And then we then move on to, well, what resources do you have to fund that lifestyle, to fund that cash flow? When we've got some information from you on the likely pathways to resolution, then we can start to draw a bit of a picture for the client on how their resources might be applied to meet their needs. And I think when we've done that, the client does tend to feel a lot of that anxiety starts to dissipate and allows them to actually let that part of the brain that needs to function well when you're required to make pretty serious decisions start to kick in, And I think that that's probably the biggest feedback that I've gotten from the lawyers that I work with, that one meeting with us seems to settle their client down enough for them to be able to then focus on the decisions that need to be made.
What's so interesting about your discussion there, the language you're using, is you're purely focused on the needs and the goals of the client. And the difference for, say, Anne-Marie and I, particularly if we're not operating in a collaborative model, is that it's not, the law doesn't really go, what are your needs, what are your goals? The law simply says, here's how it'll be. Best of luck with that, and go off and find some new needs and new goals to accommodate whatever the law has decided is appropriate for you and your circumstances. And I know teaching collaborative practice and having people like yourself in those programs, Linda, I often just see the financial planners sitting at the table for the first day of the training just going, really? Like, do we really have to do this? Because this is just what we do. Like, why do you all have to think so heavily about this? And for lawyers, it's such a different thought process to actually ask someone, what do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to go? What are you hoping? And I think the challenge for a divorcing person is that is a really hard question to answer. So having someone with your skill set that asks those questions day in, day out brings so much value to really fleshing that out.
I noticed, Linda, you used this expression of lifestyle goals, and I think in the most profound sense of lifestyle, and I think financial planners are seen as a bit of a luxury only for those who've got the capacity to create a lifestyle that's somehow better than the one they actually live. But that's the key, isn't it? It's about the individual's life and how they want to live in the most profound way. And that if you can tap into that and allay those fears, it makes sense that then they can talk meaningfully about how they might meet those goals. And when Clarissa was making the observation about how financial planners look aghast at lawyers and saying, what is wrong with you people? I had a similar experience a couple of years ago when Clarissa and I were speaking at the National Mediation Conference about interest-based negotiation, that, you know, like we had just discovered this amazing way of thinking and tackling conflict, and all of the psychologists in the room were looking at us like we had come down in the last shower. And it made me think that, I reflect on this so often, it's lawyers who think differently to the way most people approach how they move forward through situations of conflict. And I think we have to be enormously conscious of that. There's so much for us to learn about the way that the financial planners and psychologists think about people and their drivers and how you might meet them.
But I guess we can't all be good at everything. So I think that's the key, you know,
it's
of a
bringing
team.
all of that together and using all of those skills together that makes the difference in all of it. One of the questions that I often get asked and have to ponder is who should you use? So we've got a property settlement that we're trying to do. We've identified that there's potentially the need for someone with expertise other than the lawyers in the room, but is it an accountant or is it a financial planner? So I'm interested in both of your thoughts on this, and where's the line? What's the role? Who is it? Who do I call?
I suspect you might agree with this, Linda, but from my perspective, they're profoundly different roles. And maybe I underestimate the accountants in this, but the way I view an accountant is getting to the nitty-gritty valuation, asset pool issue, not necessarily how to plan for the future. They're the here and now, and the financial planner is, well, how do we maximise what this party's share of that pool does for them?
Yeah, I think that's nail on the head there. Our role is forward-looking, whereas most accountants, you will come across great accountants who do forward planning for their clients, but quite a few are working on what are the figures now, let's draw a line in the sand and have everything valued as per a certain date, and there's an awful lot of work that goes into that. So their training, again, it's back to the training, the skill sets, our training and the way that our profession is developed is that we look at the future. So we need to plan for the future, not just the next year, the next 5 years. Is 15, 20 years down the track that we need to be conscious of. So I think that's the main difference. You also tend to find with the difference between an accountant and a financial planner is again, it's more on the bigger picture stuff. So accountants are very good at collating the numbers, but then being able to relate that into do the numbers actually meet what that individual client requires. I think that's definitely where the difference is.
Yeah, and I think there's absolutely scope for both people in a process. Because there are significant differences between an accountant and a financial planner in terms of their skill sets. So I think you could absolutely look at having both in a process. One of the other discussions that we were just having before we began is literally the role of the financial planner in the process, and particularly, are they an overall neutral? Are they acting as a neutral person supporting both of the clients? Are they acting for one of the clients? Are they acting behind the scenes? Are they coming to meetings? And there's all these different approaches to it. And I'm really interested in exploring this a bit further. So Linda and Anne-Marie, you were both having a discussion before we began about who is the right neutral. Is it the accountant? Is it the financial planner? Who is it? And I'd like to open that one up because I think that's a really interesting point.
And interestingly, what Linda and I were talking about was that her experience has been not to be a neutral in the collaborative process, but to be acting for one party, and not necessarily without the knowledge of the other party, but certainly not with input from that party. And I thought that was a really interesting development, and I know Linda's given some thought to why that might be, but I think that's worth talking about. And I suppose my first question is that because you're approached by one party or their lawyer, so that it's already decided before you're contacted?
I think that is the case. I've not been invited. So if I'd been invited, then maybe my experience would have been different to date. So, in our discussion, we were talking about how would that look and could it work? And I do think on reflecting, think that it can work. It's the same skills, it's the same questioning techniques. Most people don't understand the structures that they have. Their accountant kind of does that for them, and usually we need to kind of interpret accounting speak for the clients, say, well, what the accountant's referring to there is this, in a more everyday language. So I do think it actually can be quite valuable to have someone there guiding people through their goals and what they would like life to look like. I think some of the concerns that I had initially was that I feel that usually there's an imbalance in relationships. So either one person is great with the kids and, that's their skill set, or one person is good with the finances and tends to look after that side of it. And I guess where I've been used very successfully in the past is supporting the person where the financial knowledge is a little lacking. And I just wonder for that person that it may be a little embarrassing to ask some questions in a group format that are financial, to have that pressure of, I don't actually know what they're talking about here. And he's always said I'm hopeless and that he does everything. And, I think that would be kind of intimidating in a way.
Yeah.
So I guess I have been used in the past to support the person who is going back into the meeting, who just needs to really understand what's going on a little bit.
So I describe that as almost an educator. Really.
Yes. Yeah.
So it is really almost about bringing a person up to speed so that they can then make the decisions they need to make, and they're not sort of lagging behind. And I know John Fine, we all know well, uses a beautiful analogy about his little adventure walking the Kokoda Trail, and the notion that you've got to have the slowest walker at the front of that line when they do that walk, because obviously you'll lose them otherwise. And so the slowest person leads the race, and that's the pace that everyone goes. And I use that all the time when I'm training in collaborative, because it's the same. If you don't have both clients moving at the same pace or moving at the slowest person's pace, you're going to reach a very serious impasse at some point where someone simply won't be able to make decisions because they won't have the information they need. So So that education role is becoming more and more common, both in collaborative, but I also just think in law generally. I'm seeing it more and more. And I know you were talking to us again about the fact that you're doing a lot of this work, both in collaborative, but just in everyday run-of-the-mill law.
I'd say probably 10% of our referrals are in the collaborative space. So that leaves 90 coming from the other side, the more traditional methods of resolving disputes.
So does that suggest then that clients are looking for a much more holistic understanding of their financial needs and resources than what a lawyer says is the range?
I don't think the clients actually know. I think it really comes down to the lawyer being proactive and saying, it would really be helpful for you to go and see this person. These are the things that this person can offer you. I think it would be helpful to me as well, and to resolving your matter, quickly and more efficiently for you. And I think that it needs to come from the lawyer, because as I was saying before, that the level of anxiety that someone's experiencing, they don't really know where to go. So they really do need guidance, and I think quite firm guidance. I think some of the feedback that I've had from lawyers who refer to us, and they're referring quite early in the process, and I definitely encourage people to do that within 1 or 2 meetings with their client, that the client comes to us, has an initial meeting, and then walks out actually feeling a lot more settled and ready to make those decisions that maybe the next steps.
So Linda, if the way that we as lawyers in the collaborative model are referring clients to you is based on the one who needs more information, who's less inherently knowledgeable about financial circumstances, and Linda and I have worked together in this way previously, where I acted for the wife who really didn't have a detailed understanding of the business affairs, and the husband absolutely did. My question is, do you think that this thought process, this future planning thought process, is then happening for the party who does have the financial knowledge? Or are they focused on the running the business information rather than their financial future?
Well, quite often, it's very interesting to us to get a feel for what the ex-spouse is looking for. So we will ask our client that, we will ask the lawyers that, because if we're trying to do some generating of options, there's no point presenting something that's not going to be palatable or that's not going to in some way meet the needs of the other side. So a lot of the time we're guessing. We're kind of saying, well, he's approaching 56. Surely he's probably ready to hang up the tools at 60. He's probably more interested in having, this would be good for him to do that. But unfortunately, we can't guide that person and relay that information. This deal is great for you because of these reasons, because of your age, your access to super, all these different things. We're relying on his advisors to do that, and quite often we think it's just not there. So that's why the more I've thought about it, I think having someone in the room that's explaining these concepts as well, and how entities work, and structuring, and how that actually is useful to you as you age and get closer to retirement is very helpful.
And then, so although you're not a neutral, you're not a polarizing force for the party who is
absolutely
consulting
not.
you.
No.
And I think that's a really powerful way of viewing the financial planner, as someone who can help your client see things from another perspective in perhaps a less obvious manner than what the lawyers might do. One of the things we were talking about, Linda, and I'm interested to see whether you're able to think about this, is that the process of gathering information for one party is so deeply personal and so confronting that the capacity to articulate it then becomes a challenge. And what is it that you do that frees them up to be able to tell you that they can't tell the lawyers? Or what is it that the lawyers are not doing to tap into that?
Look, we are very well trained. You know, a skilled financial planner will just keep asking open-ended questions. You know, they will just keep going until the person can start to articulate something that, you know, that does sound right.
And I wonder if I'm a
them.
client, I expect that my mind is probably very different if I'm sitting talking to Linda versus I'm sitting talking to me. Because if I'm sitting talking to Clarissa the lawyer, somewhere in my head I expect there will always be a sense of how is this going to ultimately get me into some sort of strife, not help me in the long run. Like,
Correct.
What have I done already that
Don't be vulnerable.
like there's a sense of, there'd be a level of fear, I expect, which I don't think you would have with a planner.
And I think confusion. Because the client, quite often I explain to the client before I start asking the questions, I said, look, these questions might seem quite strange to you that I'm delving into these areas of your life, but you will see in the end of this meeting, it will all make sense to you. So if you could be patient, if you don't mind, let's get going, you know, and they will say, oh, okay, you know, and they will at some points go, why do you need to know that? You know, but it is, you know, we do a lot of family tree stuff, for instance. So we'll be asking them about their parents. How well are they? Where are they situated? Do you have brothers and sisters? All this kind of stuff. How old are your kids? You know, so I think the level of depth in the questioning goes far beyond that person and their immediate family. And so that can actually bring up quite a lot of issues, because actually I'm really concerned about my mum.
Yeah.
She's getting older and I might have to fund some of her, you know, going into a nursing home. I'm worried that she's sick.
And that element of, for want of a better word, judgment that exists between a solicitor-client relationship because of our inherent filtering doesn't exist in the relationship with a financial planner. It's just information.
Yeah,
that's
just to really paint a picture. It reminds me of when you get a family report in a court process and you suddenly go, oh, there's all this stuff about my client that I just knew nothing
I've never
about.
asked that.
I never knew that their parents did this, or they lived here, or they did whatever. But you know, it's that much more a broad understanding of the person than our generally very narrow understanding of that person.
And part of that narrowness that we've been talking about between the three of us is that lawyers have a very narrow framework within which solutions can be offered. And we don't like it when clients tell us something that we can't solve because it doesn't fit within the framework. Linda, do you feel as though you've got a greater skill set to then respond to the problem or the inability for the pool to meet the goals and needs?
I think those conversations are much easier had in an office of a financial planner than they are in a lawyer's office. The concept that we generate options is all about that. So quite often, you know, someone will initially come in and say, oh, you know, these are all the fancy things I want to do. And we look at the pool and we go, oh, that's probably not going to work. You know, how do I diplomatically get this client to the right place? You know, a more realistic expectation, I guess. And that can take some time. It won't happen in one meeting. But the kind of things that we will do with a client is ask them to prioritize their goals. So they might say to us, I must stay in the house. The kids are used to it. It's where all our friends live. You know, it would be too disruptive. It's, you know, stabilizing, all these types of conversations. And so if that clearly looks to us to be not the most sensible decision, and that they probably should look at other options, some of the things that we will do with the client is just ask them to put above or below other things in their life. So we might say, well, is it more important for you to be worrying about money coming in through the front door to be able to put shoes on Johnny's feet? Or is it more important to stay in the house? What's more important? Yeah. And then quite often the client will say, well, actually, I can't stand the stress of not knowing how much money's coming through the door. I'd rather have a little bit extra. You know, and I would put the house below that. Immediately, you've moved that person's fixed position into a more malleable form where more options can be thrown around.
And I think the advantage you have as well is you can model what some of that actually looks like.
Yes.
So the old, I want to keep the house, you can literally, that's where I love the skill set I've seen from people like yourself is the magic graph line that
Yeah.
goes hopefully up
Mm.
as opposed to the one
Or
that
at least
comes
not down.
rushing down.
Yes.
And that modelling around, if you're going to keep the home, this is what your income and your cash flows are going to look like, versus if we were to try something different, this is what that might look like.
Yes.
And the beauty in that process is the client is being offered the opportunity to make an informed decision. So if you
Yes.
want to keep the home, you can,
Yes.
but this is what life looks like in that
Yes.
scenario versus this. And
Yeah.
that for me, again, is a very different decision than the old, I just want 80%, 70%, I have to keep the home. It sounds like a lot of money, 70 or 80%, so let's do that. Very different thought process for people.
Yes.
And so valuable. Bob's asked us a question, and Bob, I'm not ignoring your question, but what I really want to come to is what is the role and how does Linda and people like Linda end up in the collaborative process? So Bob's question to us is, when you introduce Linda into that collaborative law process? Is it at the start? Is it at another meeting? How does it work? And I expect all of our answers to this will be it's horses for courses and different in every case in some respects. So
Yeah.
let's just talk perfect world for a short moment. I love to be in perfect world.
Yeah.
It's my favourite place to be all the time. If life was amazing and we could create our perfect collaborative model, if there was ever such a thing, I think in my world we would actually have all of the professionals at the table from the very beginning. That would be my perfect collaborative model. And so from that perspective, I would love to have you at every first meeting, and whether you'd need to be at every meeting thereafter is up for discussion. But I see immense value in having people like yourself at the first meeting, particularly given the first collaborative meeting is often the exploration of goals and interests.
Yes.
Which chances are you're going to be able to really help with.
Yes.
In a way that sometimes if a client's stuck, or even if a lawyer's stuck trying to help a client get through that process, having a planner in the room that can do it in a curious way as opposed to a aligned or a judgmental way would probably be very powerful.
Yeah.
But what has been your experience today? When are you finding you're being brought in?
Well, in the more traditional sense, I've been more effective to be brought in within a meeting or two of the client meeting with their family lawyer. So once you've got a fairly good idea of the asset pool, it doesn't have to be due diligence, doesn't have to have been done, and all that stuff. It really just needs to be an approximate idea of the client's pool of assets. That's usually all we need.
Yeah.
And I think the earlier the better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you talked about value just the other day, just before, I think that some of the people are concerned about cash or the cost of seeing other professionals is that eventually they'll need to see someone like us anyway. This all needs to be implemented, superannuation needs to be split, accounts need to be open. They really should be seeing a financial planner at the end of their matter anyway, and I think that's more the traditional time for family lawyers to refer. So, and that will cost them money. So the way that we tend to work things at Elston is that the client is on a fixed fee. So they don't need to worry about how many times they call, how many meetings they have. But that fixed fee also covers that plan that goes on prior to all the implementation happening. So they would have paid it anyway.
Yeah.
But they're getting the value so much sooner than what they would have.
And a very different role for you in that scenario too. Like you're a part of potentially working out what is right for them.
I was just
rather than too late.
Rather than this is all you've got to play with, Linda.
That's
have a lovely
right.
time.
Correct. It's very difficult.
There's value for someone else in the process, and that's us as the lawyers.
Yeah.
In the matter that Linda was involved with me, not only was her assistance just invaluable in terms of where my client was coming from and wanted to be and how she might meet those goals and interests. But then when we were doing that hideous, from my perspective, work about the self-managed super fund division, when there were questions coming from the accountants who were looking after the fund and the new fund and whether shares or cash were going to be transferred, Linda was all over it. All I had to do was say and know, and my client know with complete comfort that Linda would know what to do. I think if you try to find an expert to help you at that stage, it's far too late. That is really reinventing the wheel in the way that you were talking about. What you can do in your relationship with your client and in the negotiation process, when you know someone else is an expert at their job and doing their job, is profoundly different. And I think that's part of the value in the role of a heavily involved financial planner as opposed to the cost. I think the challenge for us is how we articulate that to our clients.
I'm really interested, to any of you listening, I'm really interested in your thoughts and your views, and if any of you have used financial planners, if you want to flip them through to us, about how you do have those discussions with clients about adding other professionals. I know from my perspective, I'm very comfortable suggesting adding people, and I'll often say to a client that I actually think it will save them money in the long run. Having someone other than me who, you know, actually understands money, actually understands what they can do with it, having that person actually looking at your money is going to save you an awful lot of money, rather than me siphoning through bank statements and whatever it is.
And the graphs are amazingly powerful. They transform a thought process in an instant.
Yeah.
The idea that you can see what it looks like now, what it looks like in 15 years, what you might be able to leave to your children is enormously profound, I think. And you can't do that in words.
And to be able to model the impact of that 5%,
yes,
or that, you know, that money that I want for the next 4 years because I don't want to return to work or whatever it is, like to actually model the impact of that, both for the person receiving it and the person giving it, and have something tangible to base a negotiation on, as opposed to the old, oh, well, I just think it's a good idea. It sounds like a good amount of money.
Here's why it might not be palatable to them as the graph disappears.
Just my experience too recently in a matter, just coming back, I guess, to Bob's question and this first meeting and when does someone like Linda get involved. I'm in a matter at the moment that has a massive team in it. And we did our first meeting, and we had at the first meeting the 2 lawyers, the 2 clients, we had a financial planner, we had the parties accountant, and then we had a financial neutral accountant. So I don't know how much I can't even count with my fingers right now.
It's a big table.
It was a lot of people in a big table, but it was the most valuable thing. And that was just the first meeting. And then it sort of branched off from there. So there was meetings that were conducted just with the clients and the lawyers and a psychologist to deal primarily with the parenting issues. From that point, we haven't had the financial planner back at the joint session because he is working with one of the parties. But him being at that opening meeting was so helpful for everybody, and I think for him too, because he got to hear both parties' goals, got to understand the dynamic, got to get a better sense of both of them, even though he's working primarily with one of them. And the way he's been working as well is, my client is a business owner, and my client's been very openly emailing and communicating with the financial planner to exchange information, to provide budgets, to give him what he needs to be able to help the wife. So I'm a huge fan of horses for courses and finding the right way of working in the matter that you have. And if in some circumstances people have resources to be able to facilitate that level of service, and in other circumstances they don't. So you've got to be able to have your frank conversations with your professionals and say, this is what these people need. How can we deliver that service in a way that's manageable for them? And I think it's all doable, but it's just having the professional relationships again to be able to literally be honest and frank and say, we can't run 20 meetings in this file. No, it's not going to be useful for anybody. They simply can't do it.
And like Clarissa and I say every month, this is deeply thoughtful work, working out what that client needs and might benefit from, and asking them the questions that allow you to draw that conclusion takes time for you to think through and target them, and everybody is different.
Yeah. Kate, up in happy Townsville. I hope it's sunny up there today, Kate. Nice and sunny in Brisbane, Vegas, and finally not 30 degrees, so I'm really excited. She says, I actually talk to clients about financial planners and accountants and having them involved in all processes regarding a property settlement, whether collaborative or otherwise, and clients seem very amenable to getting the advice. Couldn't agree with you more, Kate. I think the minute you start opening up these conversations, there's very few people that will say no. Why wouldn't you want as much help as you can get?
There's plenty of ways to prime your client, for want of a better word, to understand why they're necessary by asking questions about, well, what would your future look like if you got that asset? What does that mean when you're 55 and you have to slow down for work? What does that mean when the kids are at school or are not at school. And a client will not know the answer to that. And there's your moment to say, well, I know someone who can help answer these questions and help you work it out. But it's, I think, a lot from a client's perspective, because of the trust they have in us, the way we sow those seeds is an opportunity that exists in all matters, not just collaborative matters, but obviously in a really profound way in collaborative work.
I think too, if you're unsure about how to have that conversation with your client, then form a relationship with Linda or someone like Linda, someone close to you, and ask that person. Ask them. Say to Linda, I'm acting for Mary, and I really think Mary needs your help, but I'm not sure how to best have that conversation with her. Give me some tips. Have that dialogue. I think that's one of the easiest ways to get the information you need.
I actually think the hardest sell in terms of the benefit for clients is men who think they have an understanding of their business affairs, and they might well do, but this is a completely different concept. And to suggest to the self-employed businessman who's always had a grip on everything that maybe you aren't planning enough, understanding enough for your future is much harder than to a woman who says, I don't know what on earth is going on. I need some help to find my way through this forest. What are the tips there, Linda, about the value for someone who thinks they know all that they need to know?
Yeah, look, and we can see that many times. I mean, obviously, I don't just have family law clients. I don't just have single females. And I think it really comes down to talking about the same things. What do you want? Where do you want to end up? And I think men do actually have quite a lot of fear associated with the loss of assets, loss of capital. I thought I could pressure of maintaining the family and, the cost of everything, and now it's all going to be split. So what we see happening with some men is that they will then try and take on a lot of additional risk. There's quite a lot of additional risk taking that might go on to recoup what they've lost, in effect. So they might say, oh, well, I was originally going to retire at 60. Oh, that's out the door now. I'm not going to be able to do that. So I was actually saying, well, have we actually done the numbers on that? Do we know that that's not possible? Let's have a look and see what, let's talk about
what it would take
for you to retire then. What might that look like? Or do you just push it out another 3 years and that's what this looks like? And those graphs are very powerful with that type of quantitative person. But again, it's just the same thing. When would you like to hang up the tools? Are you going to have enough? And people, even men who love what they do, or women who love what they do, quite often we're working with very high net worth individuals who got to there because they are great at what they do. They can't imagine themselves not working. So a lot of people say, oh, I'm never going to stop working. I'll work forever. Well, that's just practically not going to happen. But usually how we would put that is to say, well, at some point you'll probably want to have some options. There may be things that you've talked about, you always wanted to do that volunteer work. You wanted to be able to use your skills to set up a not-for-profit, or you wanted to be able to pick and choose the consulting work that you take on. Let's work out what point you can have those options to step off the treadmill and make the decisions that you would like to make with your life. So that's a great way to it's all about options. It's not about stopping.
And understanding those options and analysing them, pros and cons.
If
you want to stop work at 60, what does it mean?
Unshackling that burden of I'm going to have to just truck on because I'm the income earner.
Couple of comments that have come in while we've been talking. So Kate's reminding me that Townsville's always hot. Thank you, Kate. But you're just making that comment that particularly when clients are in that 50 plus bracket, it is really around retirement planning, and more so than property settlement. And the involvement of a financial planner is essential. And Bob just making the comment that if data gathering is promoted as helping to arrive at options, we see it as, the clients will see it as part of an input rather than wondering what assets they'll lose. And I like that. I like that notion of, the more I can understand this information and be a part of this process, it's a positive, not a negative. And I think too, that hope notion of what you're really suggesting there, Linda, the hope that it doesn't have to be the end of everything, but you might have to shift things, and let's actually set a plan. Let's set some goals. How do you do this? And I think the minute someone does set some financial goals, I'm not in a financial planning role, but my experience is that many of us don't set financial goals. And I don't think it's until you hit your 40s that you suddenly go, oh,
am I going to make it?
do I have enough? Do I now need to think about this stuff?
Yes.
And often it's something like a divorce that does make people go, oh, golly, I do need to think about this stuff.
Yeah, I am going to have to know, not just hope for the best.
And just think if I just put my super aside, magically something will happen when I'm 65. And I think there is a fear still in engaging with financial planners.
Definitely.
Sadly, your industry is a little bit like ours.
Yes.
It's not.
I think we're a little worse than yours, to be.
It's been hard, hasn't it?
Yes.
It's been really tough.
Yeah.
So part of it is also that demystifying it for people and ensuring that they're not scared.
I think it's really important I think the main issue in our industry has been lack of qualifications and compliance and ethics. So I think it's, when you're referring to a financial planner, they're the kind of things that need a little bit of investigating. You know, do they have a relevant degree in financial discipline? You know, I think degree qualified needs to be looked at. What other postgraduate qualifications do they have? So I do think that a certain amount of due diligence is required from you to just ensure that the person that you're referring to does have the qualifications
that you need, definitely.
Yeah. Especially in this space as well. I think they should understand family law process and how it works.
And obviously collaboratively trained.
Yes.
I know when we were all starting out in this field of collaborative practice, we were using whoever we could use to get matters moving. There are so many people trained now that I think it is so important to work with people that have done that training. It is a mind shift no matter what profession you're coming from, but understanding the legal process, understanding how that works is essential to really getting the smoothness of a process in place. I think we've spoken a lot as we've been going around the role of a planner along the way, and we've touched a little on this bit, but I actually think the option generation and evaluation is one of the most helpful elements of a planner in any process, but particularly in the collaborative process. And that tends to come across in, meeting 3 or meeting 4. And again, if you've got 2 lawyers in a room and you've now got a difference in terms of outcome, often all we can do is sort of sit there and do the old negotiation, positional bargaining. You say 200,000 cash, my client says 100. Oh, well, congratulations. Let's find a number somewhere in the middle. But if you bring in an element then of a planner, you can actually look at the difference. What does that $200,000 mean? What does 100 mean? What's the impact on this person if their loan is so much more versus if it's not? What does it actually mean? As opposed to just, you want this and I want that, and we'll horse trade for an hour.
I think
until we get there.
That's a perfect illustration of the narrowness of a lawyer's thought process and what we can offer, especially once you're in the range, once you know it's an outcome that the court is likely to do. You've got nothing left to work with. You've got your client's interests, which haven't resonated with the other already, otherwise it would be down to horse trading. But the depth of what the financial planner can do is to maximise every opportunity between that $0 and $100,000.
Yeah, I think
we find 50 other options.
That's right. And I think that some of the skills that financial planners have is around, that structuring, how to utilise structures. And I think Anne-Marie, we had quite a good experience with that, where we did an option generation meeting with the client and her commercial lawyer. And I think that was very helpful because there were things that we could articulate or identify with, making the most of super contributions, using bring forward rules that actually made the amount of money that the client needed to seek actually less.
Yeah.
She needed less capital because she was going to have more in her pocket. Yeah. We didn't have to have tax leave.
And imagine us trying to sit there and work that out.
And the way that Linda could articulate that was instantaneous. I remember thinking, God, that would have taken me 3 days to explain.
Tax and super legislation.
Yeah, even to have come up with the idea, let alone articulate it to a lady who had no prior knowledge of how any of these things worked.
Yeah, so valuable. I know even, and I'm going to speak on his behalf, John Thine, in this option generation and evaluation, it's just so powerful. And coming at it from a financial perspective as opposed to a client perspective, this is what we want, this is where we're at, just opens up the conversation, makes it a much smoother conversation. And you can often say or ask the hard things in a very different way, even if you are aligned with a person.
Yes.
It comes across in a very different way.
Yes. And I think that's a real work in progress for most lawyers, myself included. You get to a point where you advocate, even if you're trying to be collaborative, you are watching your client's bottom line. Sometimes even when you don't know what that is, it's very hard to shake that, oh, well, anything could happen. And what happened in that matter that Linda and I did, although these people were fortunate that their pool was going to always provide for a delightful lifestyle for all of them, was that when my client was articulating this particular option, the response was so positive and so instantaneous that I got an actual shock. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm not listening anymore. The whole experience was so different because it really met we could articulate how it met his needs and expectations as well as hers. And I don't think that's necessarily a pool related issue. I don't think you need a big pool for that to happen. I think you need the language and the thought process that your financial planner gives to allow you to do that.
So coming to the end today, but what I did want to touch on was getting the most out of someone like yourself. My tip on this all the time is take the time to ask you. Take the time to have coffee, to sit down, have a chat, understand how you work, understand how you like to work, understand how that, if I'm referring a client to you, what their journey will be like in your office, and having a knowledge of a person. And I think the minute you've got that, it makes it so much easier to get the best out of you. But I'm also a fan of literally saying to you, Linda, I don't know what you can do with this, so can you just do what you can do with this and tell me what that is, rather than me saying this is what you will do.
Yes.
Without then an understanding of the broadness of your knowledge and experience. But that's my 2 cents on that. What do you guys say about getting the most out of an expert?
From my perspective, it's like everything else with collaborative practice. When you, the lawyer, lets go, you get a whole lot more. When you let other people have some input into part of the solution, it's much bigger than you. And usually, from my perspective, better.
Yeah. I just agree with all of that.
Yeah. Bob's made another great comment that empathising with the client, looking at their goals before the split up or before the outcome is discussed, is really powerful. And the clients see that as taking them into account. And I think for me that summarises the beauty of collaborative practice. You are taking the actual person or people in front of you and you're asking them what matters to them before you're having any discussion about what the law considers should matter to them, and trying to find the balance between the two. But their goals and interests should ultimately win out, whatever they are and however that works. And it is a really different thought process, and it's a thought process that I use in all of my matters. It doesn't matter whether I'm in collaborative or anything else. I'm more interested in understanding what actually matters to the person I'm working with, and then trying to see how I can use the law to achieve that. Than saying to someone, other way around, this is what the law will deliver you, and have a lovely life, whatever that means at the end of it.
And letting your client be vulnerable and articulate their greatest fears, that thing you would never do in a traditional process, let your client seem anything other than 6 foot tall and bulletproof, is so profound. And if they articulate at that first meeting, I am terrified of losing the security of a home or paying every penny I have out to support him or her, and the other party hears that, you've framed your discussion in a completely different way.
So
it's a big ask, I think, of clients, but it always changes for the better the dynamic of the discussion, I think, if they can do that.
Are there any downsides of bringing in a financial planner? I'm going to say no.
I'm struggling to think of one. I think the only issue from my perspective is persuading the client early about value. I think you do that eventually, but the real trick, I think, is getting someone like Linda in from the very beginning. I wouldn't call that a downside. I think that's the challenge.
Yeah. And I think that just comes with experience, with confidence. I know the minute you can say, I've used this person before, I've seen what they did for this family, let me tell you about how that worked, it it's much more powerful when you can give someone a case study or a context
Definitely.
to
Story.
the experience.
A story helps.
Yeah. And if you don't have a story of in a collaborative process, because I know some of you are still starting out with this work, use a story of in another matter, in my own life, whatever it is. But that storytelling is a really good way for any human being to be able to go, okay, that makes sense to me now. I understand how that works.
Anonymize a graph.
Yeah.
Show a client, this is what happened in a matter I did before. Here's what it looked like for her. And the graph's always full of lovely, colourful things. You don't have to understand them. You just have to see the overall effect.
It's all about the line.
Yeah. Is it going up? Fantastic. If it's staying steady, good enough. Is it plummeting? Problem.
And then Linda came in and the graph went up.
Yeah.
However it works. All right, so we're coming to an end, and I'll give you a few minutes while I natter about some stuff coming up to pose any more questions or make any more comments. Thanks so much, Kate and Bob, for your dialogue as we've been going through some really helpful comments that you've been making. Coming up to very hot, happy Townsville on the 13th and 14th of May to run both some introductory training and some advanced training. If we can get some more players, I may be able to drag Anne-Marie up to Townsville as well. For
Come on, players.
Which I think would be really great to have her there as well. John's coming with me. John and I always have a lot of fun on the road. I think I've made him miss almost 3 planes in my experience of travelling with him, so I'm sure he's thrilled to be coming with me again.
He now goes separately.
Yeah, that's right. He tends to pick me up now, so we get to the airport on time. But if you need more information about that training, it's on the Happy Family Lawyer website. I was having all sorts of tech problems when we started, so thanks, Kate. What I forgot to do or couldn't get in here was the date for our next webinar, which is the Wednesday, the 18th of May at 11 a.m. again. And we're hoping to be chatting with another friend on that day, probably someone from the social science world, about the role of psychologists, social workers, those sorts of amazing people in this process. So yeah, we're in the recruiting friends phase of webinar development, which is good fun. So yeah. And Linda, can I just say a huge thank you for coming and putting up with our randomness, or my randomness, really, my disorganisation with slide preparation. And you can find Linda at Elston Partners here in Brisbane. I don't have your email up there. Do you want to flip it out to us now? What is...
Sure. It's just Linda with a y.mckie, MCKIE, at elston.com.au.
Perfect.
We've got quite an extensive website.
I was on there today trying to steal your logo.
Yeah, okay.
It is a good website. So you can find her here in Brisbane. You can find Anne-Marie and I here in Brisbane, Vegas. You can find me on social media everywhere. You won't find Anne-Marie anywhere, but I'm still working on that. It's a work in progress.
We also have an office on the Gold Coast, so we have advisors there. We're also happy to go to Sydney, Melbourne, and
everywhere.
Kind of Darling Downs.
You have an office in Ballina, I discovered today.
Yeah, we do.
I was like, I could get a job there.
Yeah.
I'm going to come
and all these
again. Anyway, that's it. So thanks so much, everybody, for listening to us, and have a great Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.